Good evening, I'm Jim Whaley. In the course of Cinema Showcase, I've had the pleasure of meeting and talking with many of the most distinguished individuals associated with motion pictures. But never has the honor been as great as it is this evening, for my guest is one of the greatest stars in Hollywood's history, Miss Ginger Rogers. A dazzling star of film and Broadway musicals, a dramatic actress of tremendous power, Ginger Rogers symbolizes eternal glamour. Tonight, we'll be talking about her illustrious career and films on Cinema Showcase. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And Miss Rogers, thank you so much for coming by.
Jim, it's just marvelous to be here.
Thank you. You've had indeed one of the most illustrious careers of anyone in the history of show business, and your musicals with Fred Astaire are classics. Your dramatic artistry has been honored with the highest award possible, the Oscar. And we'll, of course, go into those films in just a moment. And you've done Broadway and television. With that kind of success, could you possibly say you prefer one medium over any other?
Jim, it's very hard to say that I prefer films over the stage or television over films. I like all mediums. As a matter of fact, people ask me frequently, which is my very favorite? And I say the one I'm doing, because it is exciting. What you're doing, you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't think it was great fun.
Right.
So what I'm doing in the medium I'm in is great fun. More or less, I've been doing stage things of recent years. I've had the privilege of doing Mame in London at the Royal Drury Lane Theatre for a year, and that was a most exciting experience. And I never thought I would have that. Always, all my life, I'd wanted to do a play in London. Mm-hmm. And when this opportunity came along, I couldn't believe it, because something I had always wanted to do. And you know, we carry in the back of our thoughts something that wouldn't it be marvelous to be invited? And then suddenly an invitation comes. And that year was just packed full of interest and excitement and fun, and meeting all of the Europeans from all over. You know, they come from Switzerland, Italy, Portugal, to spend a few days in London, and then happily they'll come and visit you, stand outside the theater and wait for you so they can say hello. That's great fun.
Right. Well, there are so many things I want to ask you about your films. I hardly know where to start. What early film do you think did the most for your career prior to the musicals with Fred Astaire?
You mean prior to the musicals with Fred?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly that there was any particular one, because I was learning, and I'm always learning my craft. But I was learning my craft all the way along from the times I started making films in the East. You see, my first movies were made in the Long Island studios in New York, at Paramount Long Island Studios, and I made 5 films there. And interestingly enough, the combination of stage and screen was going on in my experience just at that very tender time of my career of learning my craft. But I was doing a motion picture starting at 9 o'clock on the set, which means I had to be up at 5:45 or 5:30, and in the studio, which was a number of miles away from my home in New York. And I had to work all day, and then I would run to the theater at night and change makeup from screen makeup to stage makeup, and be on the stage at 8:30 for the curtain, or 8:15. Then work the whole musical show, and then go out and get a bite to eat, and then go home for that same routine to start the next morning. So you see, I was then engrossed in 2 mediums, excuse me, on the same day.
Right.
And that is very exciting. It's also a good way to learn.
Right.
And I must say it's cramming it in as tight as possible. But those are the beginnings of my career.
Well, 42nd Street, of course, is a classic. And even though you weren't the star of that, you certainly came very close to stealing the whole show from everybody else in it. What do you recall about that film and working with Busby Berkeley?
Well, actually, you see, I didn't have very much dancing to do in that film at all. With all the other people who were involved, Ruby Keeler, the only thing we had to do was lines, standing in a row of showgirls or chorus girls, and we were all presumably in the chorus of this particular show that was being put together. And we did a time step or something that was very insignificant what we had to do. I didn't do any dances per se in that show at all. I think when anyone says Busby Berkeley, you're sure that because he was in the room, you had to do a routine with him. But that's not the case.
Well, how about on Gold Diggers?
On Gold Diggers, I opened the film with, if you recall, the very first shot in Gold Diggers of 1933 was when I was, it was a very close shot coming in. I mean, it was on my lips, and I was singing the song, and the camera moved away and moved about a block away. Really, the camera zoomed up and kept moving and moving and moving. It was a city block away when it stopped. And that was the opening shot. That is the amount of the Busby Berkeley number I did in the show, standing there singing the song. So you see, really, what I've had to do with Mr. Berkeley is practically nothing, except be in the same area at the same time.
Well, you had actually met Fred Astaire even before you did Flying Down to Rio, sometime before that, hadn't you?
Well, I was in a musical in New York called Girl Crazy, and that musical needed some friend of the producer to come over, and this friend of the producer happened to be Mr. Astaire. He was in another musical playing at the same time with his sister. And that was the first time I met him, and he came over and looked at some of the routines that the leading man in this musical comedy I was doing and I were doing, and made some comments to us about how he thought this or that or the other would be cute to do. So that was our first meeting. Then later I met him again. I went over to see his show, the show that he was performing with his sister. It was called The Bandwagon. And after that, why, we had a couple of dates. We went dancing in the park a couple of times. So I guess we were more or less rehearsing our about to be teaming.
Right. Well, even before Flying Down to Rio, hadn't you decided that you didn't want to do any more musicals?
Before I did
Before Flying Down to Rio, I think I read that at that time you really just didn't want to do any more musicals at that time.
I think perhaps whoever reported that was a little confused by the fact that when I had done I'd done so many musicals with Mr. Astaire, and at that point I asked the studio if they wouldn't give me something a little more serious to do, because I had been I'd been burdened with doing 3.5 movies a year, and if 2 of those are musicals, that's an awful lot of work. And the work I was more interested in doing had to do with the more dramatic things. I eventually got to do them, and Kitty Foyle was the second of the more serious things I had to do on the RKO line. The first one was Primrose Path. I don't suppose you saw that. That was at that time looked at with one eye, because they didn't think this was a very neat picture to show the public. But nowadays it would be nothing.
Gregory LaCava directed that,
That's
right?
right.
You did several pictures with him.
Yes, he's just marvelous.
Right. Well,
Just a marvelous.
apparently that was an era in reporting, because I, of course, am very familiar with the fact that after doing the Astaire musicals, you did want to do more serious things, but chalk that up to an era in reporting then.
Well, that's all right.
But,
That happens all the time.
The karaoke from Flying Down to Rio became such a dance craze, and the film was a great success. Did you have any idea that it would lead to the heights that it did in all of the other musicals with Fred?
Well, it's always hard when you're going downriver in a boat to know what's around the bend. I hardly think any of us knew that there was something coming up that would be exciting and would catch on with such a... it really was like a forest fire when we did this dance. After we did this, it was just... It was amazing. Everyone was amazed at the interest shown in the work that we had done. So the next thing I knew, I was scheduled to do The Gay Divorcee, which up until that time, someone else was scheduled for it. So I was very thrilled. I was never too interested in being a musical comedy actress, truly, but that's the way it fell, and that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Well, the Continental in The Gay Divorcee was an even bigger success than the karaoke.
That's right. That's right.
Who choreographed that? Do you recall?
Yes, it was Hermes Pan, who was, at the time I was in my very first musical comedy in New York on the stage. Hermes Pan was a chorus boy, and when he came to California as a chorus boy, and little by little he was pulled into helping, and little by little from helping, he became a choreographer, and he worked with Mr. Astaire and me, and he was a marvelous critic as well as being a designer of steps and so on. But that's terribly important in a choreographer, is to stand off and criticize and